vital and inspiring. So please welcome Jaakko.
Yes. Check, check. Labadiena. Ponios irponai. Kaip sekasi? I'm not going to give this presentation in Lithuanian, but it's actually very great to be here. I want to thank all the organizers, Laura, Dinora, Oshra, Jamison, and all of you guys for being here. The next presentation, next 48 and a half minutes, I want to introduce you to the world of biohacking. What is actually happening now when the revolution of digitalization, of more personalized approach to health is happening. But one thing that I also want to create today is a more visual experience for you. As we heard, I give a lot of presentations, and I, sit a lot in that side during different presentations, and I often think about how we can use the tools available these days. Richard Dawkins talked in the early 70s about memetics, that we've come from the world of genes, and we are now in the world of memes, where ideas basically are competing for our attention. And that's, of course, the platform economy, attention economy, all of these. Ideas are having sex in this new sphere, and they're competing for our attention. So I want to give this presentation in a form of kind of a pecha kucha, like 20 seconds per slide, a high frequency, and I already warn you that there will be a lot of stuff happening. So I want you to be ready. We're having kind of fast pace, but you can find all of the slides and certain materials that I will refer to behind that link. And I'll also show that at the end of the presentation. But yeah, that is me, small Jaakko. And I find that photo very fascinating, like a couple of months back when I found that, because both of my parents are physical exercise teachers. And those are actually books about physical exercise. So I was probably impregnated in some locker room on Sports Institute or something like that. And for the first 20 years of my life, I approached health by kind of no pain, no gain. I won Finnish championships in wrestling and went to special forces to become a paratrooper and stuff like that. And kind of thought that I'm a tough guy. The more you do, the better you do. And then a decade ago, fascinating things happened. I started to get more interested about what are actually the things that make us more sensitive. What are the things that make us carry better feeling all the time? Not just the peaks and the highs, but what are the tools that we can actually use these days to feel good all the time? And I mean that kind of in a broad sense. So that's been my passion now for a decade, to study 25 hours a day. What are the tools that we have? And the topic that I'm going to cover today is a little different compared to my background. I'm a kind of naturalist. I, grow food. I go all across the world to study different ingredients, different cultures, all of that stuff. We have a company of around 30 employees. We produce chocolate and stuff like that. See some smiles here. It's chocolate. Yeah, let's talk more about chocolate. Yeah, that's also one of my passions. But that being said, around 5 years ago, we started to notice that these weak signals are popping up more and more about biohacking. Like, what is this thing? And this is kind of a geeky term, very technocratic way of saying that what are the tools that we can use to enhance who we are? But for me, it's much more about self-knowledge, better self-awareness. So I today give a little bit different meaning for this whole semantic cloud than these guys who are correct. I'm pretty sure that in the future we will be actually expressing our artistic tendencies through our biology. So Freeman Dyson is a very famous physicist, and this is going to happen. This is already happening. because we are made of language, the core of our DNA, and we can kind of hack the communications at that level. And of course, biotech and nanotech and all of these things are coming. But today, I want to kind of flirt with the ideas around technology, but also ground it with nature and more pragmatic things that we can do today. And this is just a good example why this revolution is happening. You know, we understand that this little device would have cost, €1 million just 10 years ago. But of course, the same exponential growth in computing power is shown in the biotech area. 20 years ago, you'd want to get information from your DNA and would have cost you $100 million. Now it's few hundred euros. So this is pretty remarkable if you actually think about it. What is happening? We are creating more higher resolution of what's actually happening inside of us. And that will be the next arms race that all of these big companies are already focusing on, our biological data. So I think that biohacking is a broad term at this point. And hacking actually also kind of means that you really geek into something. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you really boil the semantics down. But you can use nature, you can use science, technology, all of these tools just to get a better understanding of who you are. And I'm going to show a little trailer to paint a picture, paint a frame, what this kind of actually could mean in our daily lives. So this was a project that we started with these fellows around 4 years ago. Olli is a medical doctor, Teemu is a tech entrepreneur, tech expert, and we went through these core essential areas for every knowledge worker and kind of used systems thinking to approach it. What are the objectives? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What can we measure these days? And we published this book a little bit less than a year ago with 1,500 references to newest meta-analysis and very kind of academic approach to these areas. And today I want to get the best tools from what I learned writing this book for you. But I think the core idea is also that these days it's just much cheaper, easier to do these interventions for ourselves, to create these feedback loops that are actually beneficial. And these can be through, human interaction, through technology, through nature. You pick the tools. But I hope that I'm going to give you first a few ideas to lay a platform in here, and then we go through some of the most pragmatic tools. So we don't often think about like that eyeglasses are extensions of our optic nerve. It's technology, or cyborgs. Or that these days the smartphones are extensions of our nervous system, our memory. Like the futurist Kevin Kelly talks about it in a way that it's our second skin. It's kind of the membrane between us and the world. So we as humans, we've always been transcending, creating more, creating these tools. And Marshall McLuhan, the famous media scholar, put it best. He said that we create the tools, but the tools don't necessarily have much meaning without us. So then the tools create us back. And this is kind of the nature of technology. We are now seeing more and more tools around us, but the feedback loop is, at this point, I think, in very clumsy and, in a sense, a catalytic phase. So we are moving more into the world of calm tech, where technology starts to disappear. It starts to actually not just give us data, but it comes in the formation. That comes information. So this is happening more and more. And I think that when we now see more and more activity trackers and this and that, it's still early phase. But I'm going to show you a few ideas of technologies that I already think that are very, very valuable. And one of them is tracking sleep. And I bring this up because actually this year there was a big study around the importance of sleep, for example, from the point of weight management. It's the second most important thing, even before exercise, if you want to lose weight, because if you don't get adequate amount of sleep, you make bad choices the next day. It whacks up your hormonal profile, the leptin system, insulin resistance, all of these things. And you're not making good decisions. So the point of these kinds of technologies is not just that, well, I know that I get 8 hours of sleep or something, but to get more into the details. How good do you sleep? So it's a loose biomarker to talk about that. Well, I sleep 7 hours. I want to know how well did you sleep, because you can sleep 5 hours and actually get much better recovery. And these are good tools for these types of interventions, whether it was that you realize that whenever you drink more than a couple of glasses of wine, your nervous system doesn't recover as well as you'd want. And you can make better choices by those kinds of observations. And I find these interesting because, for example, the MFit is a sensor that you put under your mattress. And whenever you lay down, it automatically starts to record your sleep. You don't have to put any app on, any of that. You can check the data every day, once a week, whatever. But I think that's already at the point where the technology actually starts to become more interesting. So Aura is another example of a ring. So it's designed in a much cooler way, from my opinion. So it also tracks those same things, your heart rate variability, that's a good indicator for your nervous system, balance, your activity, how much do you sit, stuff like that. And it puts it together quite nicely through algorithms that are already pretty smart. So I think these types of things starts to be even more at the surface of what will actually become more interesting technology. So what I want to say is that technology is already more and more on us, and it will become in us. So biometric sensors, you go to a gym and do some squatting or whatever, and you get data that your right leg is doing much more work than the other leg, and okay, there's imbalance. I can learn something from it, and then you remove the tool because you don't need it anymore. But this is a revolution that will end up in some weird place, whether it was some type of a singularity or omega point, whatever. Something will happen, and it's interesting to see that the connectivity and complexity and novelty raising so rapidly right now is creating certain challenges that I want to also cover before we go to the tools. But things are getting not just, we talk about Internet of Things, but they will become intelligence. They will start to chat back us, actually change our behavior. And all this drives more into individualistic approaches. How we can show your personal map, what is actually happening inside of you, around you, and not to rely on some, meta map of Medians, of Lithuanians. So this is happening more and more. And I want to leave you with 7 different ideas, 7 different frameworks that I hope are useful for every one of you. And I try to keep this very pragmatic. So we'll start by a thing that's very seasonal right now. And cold is usually not the topic that most of the women especially love. I know that. But I want to also say that this is one of those topics that whenever I talk to somebody who lives in the tropics, they don't see it in the same way as we do. I now see cold as much more an asset for our environment. Because if you live in California and you want to, use cold therapy, it's ridiculously hard to do. And why I bring this up? First, I've been tracking a lot of different biomarkers, from blood analysis to all kinds of things. And cold exposure is probably the best single tool for enhancing your nervous system recovery, increasing your deep sleep. And Wim Hof is a guy who's been now popularizing a lot of these ideas. He's a Dutch Iceman who holds like 30 different world records. He's been, climbing Mount Everest on his shorts and stuff like that. Crazy guy. But why I find this interesting is that now in small clinical trials, they've been showing that the ideas that he was talking about for decades, he started to actually use cold as a therapy because his wife died. And the history of cold therapy has always been to kind of clear up the emotional. It's like an emotional reset button. And everybody knows this, because when you expose yourself to cold, you become very embodied, and our body is always present. We become like, yeah, I'm here. And that's the idea that they've been speaking in the East for a long time, that the mind is the kite. Mind is the kite. But breathing is the thread, the rope that controls the mind. And when you become more aware of your breathing and use cold as kind of a catalyst for getting deeper layers of self-understanding, that's a profound technology. So we often overlook how close the abundance is around us. So they showed that you can actually get control over your autonomic nervous system, your innate immune system, that were kind of systems that you shouldn't have any control of. And this is the hacking idea. So I love ice cold water that's available in here, but also we now see that the technology is popping up. These cryo chambers around the world are popping up like mushrooms. So this is just another way of doing the same idea, that you change the environment around you, and it has a drastic effect on you. The production of cold shock proteins, lowering inflammation, increasing the production of many neurotransmitters, and we know the effect. It's, everybody understands that it clears us up. But even cold showers are available for all of us, and you can start this tomorrow. 10 seconds. You start by hot shower and sing and whatever. And then you end it up with 10 seconds. Next day you take 11 seconds or something. So progress in there. But I also find this interesting because we gain momentum of these types of exercises for everything else that we do. Because we expand our kind of, I did something not so comfortable today. We're kind of slaves of this hedonic adaptation. We like to be in the comfort zone. But this is a good practice, especially in the morning. I bet that it also decreases the amount of coffee you need to drink quite a bit. Because, this is the effect. That's how you start the day. And also for the ladies, I think it's important to understand that skin is the biggest organ in our body. You need to exercise it, contract, expand. It's a very important organ because most of us live in the tropics these days. Like, what is the temperature in here? You go home, we're very in the same temperatures all the time. So this is very core point also for using our skin more. And now we are actually writing a book about stress. We're publishing it in a couple of months, and it's a buzzword. So first I want to say that there are many different types of stressors around us, and not all stress is bad. We often just kind of hear it in a bad light that, well, stress is bad, but stress is necessary. This good eustress, for example, if you go to sauna, is very stressful for your body. But it adapts and it produces many of the beneficial things. So I think that the interesting angle is that when we've measured these things in work environments from people, the pattern that we see is that most people don't actively recover during the day, almost at all. So what this means is that you're pretty much in a sympathetic nervous system activated state the whole day. This kind of fight or flight mode, this prefrontal cortex, more kind of a lizard brain activated state. So these micro breaks are super important during the day. And this means that we need to get control over our nervous system at least a couple of times a day by some type of a practice. And again, all the tools that we went through boil down to this. Especially if you are too in a hurry, I have no time, you need to take more time for that. So some type of breathing exercise. It can be some type of, mindfulness is the new mindfulness, and mental health will become more and more cool every year because of the issues. But I think that it boils down also to the fact that now when the science is there, I'm not sure if you're aware of Tim Ferriss. He's kind of a big guy in the States who's now interviewed probably hundreds of very high-profile performers, artists, athletes, hedge fund managers, all of these people. And what he found, the common pattern of these high performers is like 80% of them have some type of meditation practice on a daily basis. So many, like investors, for example, use HRV, heart rate variability, as a kind of a feedback, should they do decisions today? Because if you know that in the past you've made very shitty decisions by this state that you're carrying, it's not a good idea. So this is just one of those things that, of course, there are a lot of ways to do that. But I want to bring it and ground it to a more practical level by talking a little bit of how we consume information and how we can anchor these tools into the way that we process information. So we often laugh at these types of phenomena. But I also see that for a long time, the platform has just changed. Of course, we see it more and more because everything gets amplified to every possible, direction. But it's, again, where our attention is. That's the whole value of what we are changing. So technology is just, in a way, a neutral platform. But then how do we relate to it? Are we aware what do we want it to do? Or are we more impulsively just letting the power for these platforms that are optimized to basically hijack our reward systems? So space is a good example of an application that I find interesting in this day and age. And I can show how it works. So every time you, for example, want to tap into LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, it pops up this simple breathing exercise. And the more often you impulsively go there, the more breathing you should do before entering the matrix. So I find this very interesting also because by these types of practices, you associate the reward mechanisms of how many people liked my photo and to the parasympathetic nervous system activation. And you start to actually like the breathing. I don't like to go to Facebook before, So this is a good example of a free app for your phone, for your browser, that we can, make our cognitive ergonomy more clear in the virtual realities that we are using. And you saw also in the trailer that there are tools that can measure the brain waves in your head and model that in a way that we create these feedback loops. For example, you do a simple meditation or breathing exercise and creates a auditive landscape that changes if your mind starts to wander, like what will be there in lunch, And then you do those bicep curls. You bring it back, and this just kind of makes these feedback mechanisms more quick. And for some people, these are handy tools. Headspace is probably the most popular meditation application there is. I highly recommend that. And I have to talk about air, because this is one of those things that it just blows my mind, because all the offices, all the spaces that I go, we are now aware of the black mold issues and all of these, but nobody seems to do anything about it. So we have, volatile organic compounds. This carpet is probably diffusing a lot of different chemicals, and, houses are not breathing that well, the dead skin cells, all of these things. And if you don't have a filter, you become a filter. So this is just very simple technology that you should have in those places where you spend most of your time, in your bedroom, in your office. Because, again, the science is there. If you compare office spaces where the air quality is actually good, the cognitive output is at a very different octave. So this blows my mind that somebody's like, yeah, air quality, and then does something very nuanced. These are those 20% of kinds of things that actually give the 80% of the results, because they are affecting the environment that we're living in so much. So take this more seriously. And of course, we can use other types of technologies, plants that purify the air. We can, of course, use these types of tools in our office spaces. And there are many other companies who also use the root systems of the plants to purify the air even more. So there are tools in this area. And then the whole light frame. So this is problematic. And even though many of these devices now have recognized it and kind of tried to do something about it, the problem is that the blue spectrum of light is the spectrum that basically whacks up your melatonin production, the sleep hormone. So for many people, if you're using these devices even several hours before sleep, it can really whack up how do you produce melatonin. So F-lux, iris, even more mechanical ways of blocking that light. And this can seem to be pretty funny, but I found that for many people who are actually suffering from sleep issues, get street credits from this. But these can be helpful tools. So this is one of those aspects that we need to also prioritize in a way that I don't, touch my devices 3 hours before sleep, something like that. Or use these technologies that automatically, adjust the brightness of your devices without you doing anything extra. And of course, this season, I think it's important to understand that vitamin D as a pro-hormone is basically modulating or expressing more healing genes than any other known substance. So it's not just I don't need to really know about that. Because that's light. 20% of our genome is, completely in this space of biorhythms, of light. So this is super important. And this is one of those things that I also recommend to measure. Because there are huge differences in people's genetics, the ability to absorb these nutrients. Some people have mutations in the VDR gene variant, which is responsible. How do you absorb, for example, vitamin D from the food and so on? But this is so kind of master switch that I really want to emphasize that you need to look at that more seriously. And this is a good illustration actually from a thing that they call screening. So in just 3 months of changing diet, the expression of over 500 different genes completely changed. So this is just important to understand that we are not kind of slaves of our genes. The science of epigenetics been there for a long time now, and we understand that the environment gives the signals for the genes to express themselves. So how much do we sleep? Do we have a good connection with our community? And all these things make our genes to express in a different ways. But as I said, you can also analyze these things and understand certain things by that. You know, I metabolize caffeine or alcohol completely differently than the guy next to me. And that can be helpful in certain things. And of course in medicine, like how do you metabolize certain drugs and so on. And in the realm of nutrition, I want to leave you with a few ideas, few core ideas. And one of them is that we often just, eat terms. We were in a dinner last night and the sommelier came there and, started to describe some of the, cherries and, these were picked when the moon was rising and everything is like, oh, yeah. But then when it comes to something like ordinary, like apple, it's like just apple. Nobody, So I want to give you a little analog around the whole idea. And all of these dogs are basically breeded from the, from the wolf. And it is important to understand that these also have the same genome, but it expresses itself very differently by the domestication that we've done. And if we take this analog to food, we don't often think about that, well, the Chiquita is basically, 30 times more sugary version of the wolf varieties of bananas. And I don't want to kind of romanticize this. I don't want to go back. I just want to make clear one point that for a long time now, we've been domesticating food to produce more carbohydrates, more energy nutrients. We start to farm carbohydrates instead of minerals and phytonutrients and stuff of that nature. So whenever we look at any type of food, you should also ask a question, what type of an apple? An apple a day keeps a doctor away. Like, what type of an apple? Do we talk about this berry-like apple or the most sweet varieties around us? And why I bring this up is that the differences between the nutritional profiles are quite a lot. So phytonutrients just describe kind of the overall novel chemistry that plants produce to protect themselves. It's like the immune system of plants. So if you have very weak varieties, it's like the chihuahua. It doesn't have any immune system. It will not hunt into, tundras or something like that. So whenever we domesticate these too much, what happens? We need the pesticides. We need to take care of them in the same manner as we need to take care of those chihuahuas. So this is not any kind of dualistic thing. I don't want to say that don't eat bananas or anything like that. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that if we start to make diets from very highly domesticated varieties, we don't have any insurance. We're lacking the micronutrients, the phytonutrients, all of these things. And at the end of the day, what we do? Then we go to the concentrates, drugs, supplements, all of these. So we could have more of these just from the diet. And whether it was even very nutritious things like berries. There's a difference even in the words of, if we talk about blueberries, it refers to this more domesticated variety that only contains these color pigments, these anthocyanins on a surface. But bilberry, the wild blueberry, it's full of these pigments. So my core messaging here is that what we've done, we've basically bred or domesticated the color pigments and more bitter notes out of the food. And it has been a great thing in many ways, but now we can also get more into a space where we start to implement these back to our diet in a smart way. So just as like, what is ordinary? What are conventional foods? Because it's been changing a lot over the last 20,000 years or so. And if we think about this again by kind of systems thinking, what are the most dense foods in nutrients? Of course, organ meats and stuff like that are there. But then also green leafy vegetables. That's just a fact. And again, it's not that, well, I ate a big salad. Yeah, and that salad just came true, and, what's the point? We get, fiber and stuff like that, but we also need to understand that you are not what you eat, but you are what you absorb. So first thing is much more nutrient-dense varieties, whether it was spinach or kale or nettles, all of these. You just, see it. Is it more bigger variety or this, leaf of lettuce that you can see through? And all of this boils down to the system that we want to hack, the digestive tract, the digestive system. And when we look at this more deeply, as I said, it's super important to think this pipe that comes from our mouth to our anus as a system that's not necessarily inside of us, in a sense that we are feeding the food for the bacteria that are then digesting it. But they're kind of not living inside of us, but almost on us. So we have more bacterial cells than human cells. So this is an ecosystem that we are carrying around all the time. And the more and more we've learned about this whole area, the more and more we understand what is the effect for also our cognition, our emotions. So, for example, over 90% of the serotonin is produced in your gut, in your enteric nervous system that produces, tens of different neurotransmitters and hormones in the gut. And it communicates through this vagus nerve to your brain. And we understand this link, but still we pay too much attention just here when we should have paid attention here. So whenever we have too much energy going to our digestion, we are, sluggy and we don't have that much energy. And when somebody is fasting or something, we might get really bright in the head. So a good example is this very ethical study that one professor did for his son. So he fed him 3 weeks of just McDonald's diet. And what happened? The diversity of different bacteria in his gut shrunk dramatically. So this is also a great metaphor, like how much diversity. We even in English language, we have the term culture, referring to culture and also something that's fermenting. Do you see the link in here? You travel across the world and you basically gather different bacteria. You have more culture inside of you to express itself to the web of life. Because we're made of this bacteria. I mean, we're much more of these than human. We have this kind of skin back bias that I am this. So why I bring this up is also that it's more cheap and the technology is better to analyze these things. To actually start to look at, how are my, gut biomes doing? What bacteria do I have there? Do I have some possible parasites or candida that's basically affecting the thought processes that I have? They are the ones who are craving for sugar and just signaling it to my brain. Or do I have good guys there who are communicating very different mental models and even thoughts to the upside? And that's the core of nutrition. Are feeding the good guys or the bad guys? I'm not worried about some artificial sweetener, aspartame or something, making, holes in my brains. But I am worried what it does to my gut biome, how it's, dumping it down. And this is the whole point. We've heard about probiotics, but it's not just that we need those good guys, we also need to feed them. And prebiotics are very necessary in that realm. So a good example of symbiotics is, let's say, sauerkraut, kimchi, something like that. It has the probiotics, but also the prebiotics. And the point with these kinds of foods is not that you need to eat much of them, but you need to eat them regularly. Tablespoon or two a day. That's the whole thing. To feed the good stuff in your gut. The other point that I want to leave you with before ending the presentation is that berries are one of those things that are very much like the wolf. They're very little domesticated, they're super nutritious, and especially the fiber part of these things is filled with the prebiotics. And I'm not going to go to this semantic porn, that's not the whole point. The whole point is that these types of compounds express themselves as pigments. You can think about, dark chocolate and the catechins in there, or the anthocyanins and all this word porn. But the point is that these are pigments. And again, you can just observe where there's more color present in there. Okay, I got the point, it was for the gut and da-da-da. But again, we need to refer to a few different points. One is that you are not what you eat, but what you absorb. The bioavailability, or how much do you actually absorb from the food. Then we need to make sure that the gut lining, the bacteria are there to actually absorb the stuff. And then we need to feed them. So fermented foods and the pigments, color pigments, especially from berries, at a little bit higher amounts that we are usually eating. Let's say, in a blender you can easily throw them 100 grams, 150 grams, even 200 grams. And these start to be kind of therapeutic doses. Even if I think about like the anthocyanins in blueberries or bilberries, in higher doses in animal models, they induce neurogenesis. So, new brain cells are forming inside of you. So these are not just foods, but these are also kind of herbs if we get enough of the material inside of us. And I use this as a great tool because what I've seen over the years is that for many people it's always nice to kind of think about I should and I must and this and that, but what will you actually do? And I think that blender is a good user interface because it's 5 minutes and you've done the dishes and you're out of the door. There's a lot of liquid. It's very easy to absorb. You can take that to your workplace, start the morning by that, whatever. But add in. Don't change, don't quit, add in. Add one of these types of beverages or drinks to your day and I'm pretty sure that something will happen. So berries, avocados. That's one of the things that I learned. I owned several smoothie bars for years in my hometown. And the texture is not coming from bananas or something. It's coming from avocados. And we all understand that the mouthfeel is very important in food. If I think about potato chips or popcorns, why do we eat these crunchy foods? Especially when we're watching a movie or something. It enhances the production of oxytocin, kind of the bonding hormone. So the mouthfeel actually affects a lot of the whole experience. So avocados for the texture. Then the greens. It can be, nettles, it can be wheatgrass powder, spinach. But this is the liquid oxygen. This is the thing that makes us actually produce energy without stimulants. We're just drinking too much energy drinks and stuff like that because nobody has energy. And the greens, that's just for building your blood, for hemoglobin, for oxygen transportation in your body. Super important. And again, what does the blender do as a technology? It breaks down these harsh cell walls that are often just coming through you. So the absorption, the bioavailability. Then there can be chia seeds, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, some seeds or a protein component. I'll put a recipe under the link so you'll find a concrete idea what this looks like. But just to give you a kind of paint a picture what could be done pretty easily. Honey, if you need sweetener, and then spices. Ginger, turmeric, all of these are probably one of the best kind of super herbs easily available for anyone. Just water or tea or whatever, and we're ready to roll. So I want to end this presentation by just reminding you that many of these things, even for me, when we went through all the data, are still pretty simple. So this donkey is actually my hero. You'll see the dramatic change in the storyline in a moment, but it's often that we think about just doing more. More and more, even though many of these things are easily available. So many of the mechanistic things are, getting outsourced more to the computers. And I think that this system that we carry around, it's funny for humans that we kind of externalize. As a philosopher, Terence McKenna, said, that technology is how we turn our minds inside out. So this is the reason we get this learning curve, but then we go back to actually appreciating more of the communication, the connectivity, and we are moving from the internet of just information into internet of experience. Because you are here because you understand that this is the way we still experience more. It brings up more energy, uplifts and extends us more. My name is Jaakko Halmetoja. It was great to be here. I'm available if you want to have a conversation, so thank you very much.